Dr. Biden's remarks were particularly timely in light of everything that's going on, and is certainly someone who can relate to the challenges our military children have. You know, our next speaker can also. Graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1968, commissioning as an officer in the United States Marine Corps. Trained as an aviator, Major General Bolden flew more than 100 combat missions during the Vietnam War before being selected as an astronaut candidate in 1980. In addition to his spaceflight experience during 4 space shuttle missions, General Bolden's National Aeronautics and Space Administration military officer career culminated as the Assistant Deputy Administrator at NASA. You know, after retiring, though, from the Marine Corps as a Major General, his astronaut experience was then recognized by President Obama. President Obama then nominated Major General Bolden to be the 12th NASA Administrator, and he was confirmed to that position. General Bolden led the space agency in its vision to reach new heights and reveal the unknown for the benefit of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm MCEC welcome to the Honorable Charles Bolden.
That's all right. Sit down, 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 sit down. Thank you all very much. Okay. First of all, this is your time, particularly the students who are here. I'm kind of loose, so you don't have any prepared remarks. I've already told somebody, get the hook about 5 minutes prior to the time. I asked somebody over here, I said, okay, what time do you want to get out of here tonight? They said, let's not stay any longer than midnight. And I went, oh, that's not good, because I don't go that long. It's really your time, and what I want to try to do is spend a little time talking mainly to the students, but it's to anybody who has questions. And I think we'll get, hopefully you will get something out of this if we just do kind of talking to each other. So I've got a couple of things I'll say to kind of get us kicked off, and I actually brought 2 videos. The videos usually work pretty well, because I want to, although I'm no longer with NASA, I was incredibly blessed to serve for almost 8 years as the NASA administrator under President Obama, and I think we really got some things going. We went through some difficult times, because anytime you lose a spacecraft, whether it's yours or one of your partners, as we went through one period of time, some of you may not remember, but during my 8 years, we lost in rapid succession 3 of the principal vehicles that we use to carry cargo to the International Space Station. SpaceX lost a vehicle shortly after launch, and we thought that was bad. And then Orbital ATK, a company right out of Dulles, Virginia, not very far from where we sit, had one that lifted off and just destroyed itself coming off the pad not very far from here, over at Wallops, the eastern shore of Virginia. And we said, boy, how bad can it get? And then a few weeks later, our partners, and we can talk about this. You can ask questions about it when I say this. Our partner, the Russians, lost a Progress spacecraft. So boom, boom, boom. We lost 3 vehicles, and we were really worried. Okay, what are we going to do? Because we've got 6 crew members on the International Space Station. They got to eat. And so we send food to them all the time. The good thing was we had sent up lots of provisions well in advance, because those kinds of things always happen in the space business. So the crew was well provisioned, and we weren't too worried. But things started happening pretty quickly as the companies began to come around. And you're probably wondering, why the heck am I telling you all this? It's because I want to demonstrate to you how your space agency doesn't operate the way it used to. So for those of you who remember the glory days of Apollo, this is not the glory days of Apollo. And I don't mean that in a derogatory fashion. And in the glory days of Apollo, space was all about countries. And it was all about countries racing each other. That's not the way it is today. Today's space is all about collaboration and partnerships. And our critical partners in NASA happen to be international. They happen to be entrepreneurial, like SpaceX, and Blue Origin, a company that some of you may not have even heard of. But keep your eye on Blue Origin. It's Jeff Bezos and his gang, and they were actually the first group to really demonstrate, other than the space shuttle, to demonstrate a reflyable spacecraft. Because what Blue Origin did was launch, land, launch, land, launch. They did it 5 times before they changed out any components on their rocket. And so that really had not been done even in the days of space shuttle, because we flew our first space shuttle mission and we got a little nervous, and so we took all the engines out, we took most of the components off, and that kind of set the pace for us with the space shuttle. We never really made it truly reusable, where you land, kind of fill it up and go back again. That's kind of gutsy. And so we will see in the coming years whether we get into truly reusable spacecraft. But what we were able to do was NASA buys the service to get cargo to the International Space Station. And one of our partners that had lost a vehicle, Orbital ATK, and their CEO, David Thompson, got on the phone that night and started calling around to the other launch providers and said, look, I need help. I have a contract with NASA to get cargo to the International Space Station, and I can't do it with my own vehicle. Can you help? And he ended up getting a company called ULA, which is a very well-established launch company, and they partnered and made sure that his vehicle would fit on their launch vehicle, and within a relatively short period of time, they were able to launch again and get cargo to the International Space Station. So what it demonstrated was the value of the partnership that we put in place and the value of having redundancy in your way to do things. So we not only had one provider, but we had multiple. We also had the Europeans and the Japanese who have cargo vehicles. So in terms of getting to space today, we're in pretty robust shape. So now, what are we about to do? I'm coming over here to the 2 things. I forgot, my rules. Okay, there are 2 rules for tonight. Rule number 1, and I'm not going to jump off. Rule number 1, you can ask questions anytime. Rule number 2, there are no dumb questions. Anything that you think of is a legitimate question, so ask it. If it comes in your mind, there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or half the people in the room who have the same question. They just don't have the guts to ask it. I built a reputation in my 34 years in the Marine Corps being the dumb question guy. I learned very early on that if you don't know something, you may as well fess up and get the right answer. That's the way you learn. So ask questions as much as you want, because they're going to give me the hook, and there are no dumb questions. So with that in mind, what's your space agency, and what are the space agencies of the world doing today? Well, we're actually talking about putting humans on another planet. We're actually talking about going to Mars, and we're talking about going to Mars in the 2030s. So what are we going to do between now and then? We've got to spend some time probably orbiting the moon. In fact, definitely orbiting the moon, where we'll work on the technologies that we think are needed to go on to Mars with people, because that's pretty difficult. That's not going to be easy by a long shot. We think we know about how to do it, but we're not ready to do it yet. So what you're going to see is probably late next year or early 2019, NASA will launch a heavy lift launch vehicle. They just kind of call it SLS. Everybody was always on me for 8 years. Why don't you give it a name? I said, well, when you name things, people cancel them. So I don't want to get it canceled, so I'm not going to give it a name. I'm going to and it worked. It was the first time we worked on a vehicle that long without getting it canceled. So SLS is the Space Launch System, and it'll get a name, but it's carrying a vehicle that's called Orion. And Orion is absolutely incredible. It is the crew module that's built to carry humans farther than we've ever been before. And a lot of people don't realize, particularly Americans, is that Orion has already flown once. It flew in December of 2014, a test flight, where we launched it on a heavy Delta launch vehicle, and sent it farther out into space than we'd ever been before with a vehicle intended to carry humans since the Apollo era. We had a very successful launch, December 2014, got it back. We wanted to see several things. 1, can it survive reentry? 2, can it survive the radiation environment of space? And 3, probably most important, can it hear us when we talk to it and maneuver? And then maneuver itself. And it did all of those things incredibly well. So that's what's coming up in 2019. Why Mars? Why Mars? That's a question. Why Mars? Okay, come on, help me. See, this is the, you know, it's the Military Child Education Coalition, all right? Why Mars? No? Because we can. Well, we don't know how to do it exactly yet. But what did well, I'm getting ready to, I'm probably the only one in the room that remembers when President Kennedy went to Rice University Stadium, and he stood before the Congress even, and he said, what did he say we're going to do back in the 60s? We're going to send a man to the moon and bring him safely back to Earth. But then what else did he say? Why were we going to do that? Because it's hard. That's important. Now, that's a dumb reason if that's your only reason. So I'm not saying we're going to send humans to Mars because it's hard, and that's why. That is not why. Mars is a planet in our solar system, and what we are learning, how many of you like astronomy and stuff? You're amateur astronomers and stuff, so I know you do, Avery. So Mars, Earth, asteroids, comets, guess what? In the day of the Big Bang, whether it was like that or whether it was like that, it all came from one place. So we all of us, everything, you know, this body of mine is very much like, guess what? Earth. How much water is there on Earth? 70%, 75%. Guess how much of my body is water? 70%, give or take. People have done a lot of studies when you talk about, look around this room, look at the differences in us. You know what percentage of us is really different? Minuscule. 90-some-odd% of us, when you look at us as a human organism, we're identical almost. We're the same. So, you know, when people tell you we're different and we have all these differences and stuff and we focus on differences among people, you all know that's crap, to be quite honest. Just to, you know. We are much more alike than we are different. And it's one of our jobs at MCEC is to help you all, particularly the students, understand that, and to help you as you travel the world and you see things that most kids in the U.S. may never see in their lives. And as you have an opportunity to experience the things that most of your classmates, when you come back here, they're not going to see that. You know, a lot of them are never going to go very far away from what they call home today. So for those of you who have had the opportunity to live overseas and stuff, you've been really privileged. So we need for you to take that experience and help other people understand the people that you met and the cultures that you experienced and how much alike they happen to be to our own culture. So let's go back to why Mars. Mars, because we think at one time Mars was very much like Earth. The bad thing is Mars is not like Earth today. That's a big problem. And we don't exactly know why, but some of the differences are Mars is now barren. It doesn't have life that we can identify, but we're not sure. We really think that we may find signs of life, maybe existing life now. Now, it won't be like, you know, what's your name? Amanda. It's not going to be like Amanda. It won't be a little green Amanda, okay? Trust me. It will be microbial if we find it, if it's there today. We may find fossils or remnants of former life or something like that. But what we do believe is that there are things that we call extremophiles. There are living organisms that live under the ice in Antarctica. There are living organisms that live right down on the top of lava in volcanoes. There are living organisms that can exist at these incredibly extreme conditions. And so we believe that that's what we're going to find, and if we can understand their origins, their development, and everything else, we'll understand ourselves a little bit better. If we can understand how did Mars go from being what at one time was a nice fertile planet to what it is today, when its magneto was turned off, it doesn't have a nice magnetosphere like we have, this shell, like a walnut shell that protects us from radiation. Mars doesn't have that anymore. And what we've learned from a series of satellites through the years is that solar winds, magnetic particles or charged particles from the sun and Jupiter and other kinds of places have just gone and scraped Mars's atmosphere away through billions of years. We don't want that to happen to Earth. You know, we have several layers that protect us. Our atmosphere is probably as critical as anything, but it's very, very fragile. And so that's why people like me who talk about, you know, we've got to understand what we're doing to our planet so that we don't become like Mars. So that's one of the reasons we want humans to go to Mars and to go to other places. But other than Mars, there are not a lot of other places in our solar system that we think it's wise to send humans because they're a little too extreme for a human being like me. So let me show you a video right now because a lot of people think that Mars is a new idea. Mars is not a new idea. NASA has been exploring Mars for more than 40 years. And I'm going to, a very quick clip, go ahead and you can start it. This was put together by the Jet Propulsion Lab, and it's going to run you through the history of human exploration of Mars.
Based on your preliminary analysis of this data, can you describe what you see on Mars?
Yes, it's there.
It's a hard planet to get to and survive. You're going to notice something about all the people in this video, so pay attention, because there'll be a test. That's called prayer.
The rover has landed face pedal down, which means right side up.
Standing back for touchdown.
Led by the extraordinary men and women of NASA and our Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Right now, the wheels of curiosity have begun to blaze the trail for human footprints on Mars.
Well, today on Mars, history was made on Earth. The successful landing of Curiosity will stand as an American point of pride far into the future.
I just wanted to call and say congratulations to the entire Mars Science Laboratory team and really all of JPL. You guys should be remarkably proud.
long from now, that'll be one of you. Very much, perhaps. What did you notice about the people? Celebration, exuberance, excitement. You know, it's, you ever try anything that you thought was impossible? Anybody tell you was impossible? That's a question. How about, okay, who's an athlete? I know my 3 granddaughters over here are athletes, so they try stuff that's impossible all the time. Anybody ever try anything that you thought was impossible, or you thought was so extremely difficult that you just didn't think you want to try it, but then you said, what the heck, what do I have to lose? Yeah, there are a couple. What did you do? Aha! If you're my height, did you make it? Yes, I did, actually. And there's a great jubilation, I'll bet. But that's what exploration is about. Exploration is about having an idea that you think you know how something is, or you think you know you're going to find something a certain way, and you say, everybody says we can't do this, but you undertake it. And for the students, that's your life. You know, you're going to get a lot of help from parents, and you're going to get a lot of help from other friends, but I would advise you not to follow the way that I went, but I would advise you to follow your passion. There is something that really, really, really excites you, and that's what you ought to do. It doesn't make any difference what a teacher says, what anybody else says. You should do what it is that you think you should do. My life has been filled with people who, when I listened to their stories, they were absolutely incredible. People who were told, well, you know, you can't do this. Guy Bluford, first African-American to go to space. Guy was told by a high school teacher when he said he wanted to go to Penn State and he wanted to study engineering, she said, no, you know, that's not for you. You should probably go off and do something else. So don't let anybody tell you what you cannot do. And for the young ladies in here, in particular, don't let anybody tell you what you cannot do. You define what you can do. And if you happen to go into a particular job and somebody says, and they're going to look at you, no matter, I don't care, it happens today, you'll walk into the boardroom and people will look at you as if to say, why are you here? And you may be the CEO, and they don't know it. But take your seat, do your job, do it incredibly well, and sooner or later, everybody will understand why you're here. And if things work out right, you know, if it doesn't work out right for them, then you can ask them to leave because you're the boss. So this is where we're going. In the field of science and exploration and engineering, we're trying to figure out how to get humans on Mars in the 2030s. And what we're doing today is we're relying heavily on commercial entities to provide transportation to space while NASA goes off and works the deep space exploration. So if you ask me how I get cargo to the International Space Station, I rely on 2 American companies, SpaceX and Orbital ATK, and they're very reliable partners. If you ask me how we get humans to space, I tell you I have to depend on my reliable partner right now, which is not a very reliable partner to have to depend on, and that's Roscosmos, the Russian space agency. We would like not to have to do that, but we don't have another capability just yet. But in a couple of years, in a year or so, Boeing and SpaceX are going to fly test flights on their vehicles, Boeing with the CST-100 and SpaceX with the Dragon 2, and then we're going to start launching out of Florida again, taking humans to the International Space Station. We won't stop flying with the Russians because we need everybody we can, and my forecast is that in the coming years, you're going to find that we're finally going to find a way to partner with the Chinese because they happen to be the 3rd nation in the world that knows how to get people successfully into space. And today, I don't think we can afford the luxury of trying to keep somebody out of the club, if you will. For those of you, most of you are affiliated with military families, and so your moms, dads, anybody who's been in the military can tell you, they spent their entire career trying to figure out how you work with bad people. You know, how do you engage? How do you expose them to who we are so that they want to be like us? Because everybody wants to be like us. And as you travel around the world, keep that in the back of your head. Everybody wants to be like you. Everyone wants to live like you, wants to have what you have, and you just need to try to help them understand how it is we get to where we are and what we've done. So now, how are we going to get to Mars? I've got another quick video that I'm going to show you, and I will try to explain beforehand because it goes kind of fast. What you're going to see are a few cartoon things, but most of what you will see is real live hardware that's in test today. So it may be parts of the Space Launch System, the Heavy Lift Launch Vehicle. It's the Orion spacecraft. It's the launch facilities at the Kennedy Space Center. You're just going to see normal Americans like us who are just working their backsides off trying to get humans to Mars. And they are really, really, really excited about it. And, you know, a lot of times they don't get credit because not very many people know. So if we can start the second video, and I'll be quiet. Looking out the window as if a crew member were in there. So that's what it looks like when you've got like 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the outside and fire and everything. So that's what we're doing to get there. So let me see if you have some questions in the time that I have left. And if you don't have them, then I'll have to start asking questions. And I'm not, yes?
If you had any advice for the students that are here today, what would be your advice?
Oh, if I had any advice for the students here today, what would be my advice? I'd go back to one thing I said, which is follow your passion. 3 things: study really hard. And you may say, what should I study? If science and engineering or you think that's what you're interested in, take every science course you can, every math course you can, no matter how difficult. You'll learn it, you know. So that's the first thing. Study really hard. Work hard. The same way, how many of you, by show of hands, how many of you are athletes or musicians or something outside the academic arena? Go ahead, raise them up. Okay. How many of you have coaches? What does your coach tell you almost every single day? If you want to be good, what do you have to do? Practice. That's why I'm a lousy golfer. I don't practice. If you want to be good, and if you want to be number one, and you should want to be number one, you've got to work hard. So just as you work hard to become the world's best ballerina or the world's best soccer player or the world's best basketball player, when you get in the classroom, you've really got to focus. And you've got to become the world's best trigonometrician, if there is such a word, or geometrist, if there is such a word. You've really got to work hard. And the final thing I would say to you is, whatever you do, don't be afraid of failure. Failure is okay. You know, when I grew up, we were always told you can't fail. My mom and dad were school teachers, and they were pretty tough on us. And they always talk, you just can't fail. They had a reason for saying that because I grew up in the segregated South. But what I learned over time was, yeah, you can fail. In fact, you shouldn't try to fail, but if you don't fail at something, you have not tried. You've taken the easy out. You know, so do not be afraid of failure. I talked about the young ladies earlier, and those of you who happen to be of color, don't let people scare you. Don't let somebody tell you you can't do this so that you give up. You know, I never dreamed of being an astronaut. Never. Never dreamed of flying airplanes. In fact, when I left C.A. Johnson High School in Columbia, South Carolina, I knew two things. Both were negative. I was not going in the Marine Corps, not on your life, because Marines were crazy. And the second thing was I was not going close to an airplane. I was not going to fly because that was inherently dangerous. And as I went to the Naval Academy, my first company officer was a Marine who really impressed the living stuff out of me. He was like my dad. He was incredibly tough, but unbelievably fair. And when it was time to graduate 4 years later, I looked back on that year and I said, I want to be like him. I went in the Marine Corps. Found out I didn't like crawling around in the mud. And I looked for an option, and my wife kept saying, why don't we go to Pensacola? I said, well, because that's where the flight school is, and I don't want to fly. And she just kept saying, why don't we go to Pensacola? And I learned then what I keep learning over and over and over with her is, she's right. And so, you know, we finally went to Pensacola, and the first time I got in an airplane and we lifted off, I went, wow. I cannot believe this feeling. And then I had an instructor who was a test pilot, and he talked about the challenge of being a test pilot. And it just blew me away, and I said, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to be a test pilot. And I worked really hard until I was able to go to test pilot school. And then I met the late, great Dr. Ron McNair, who became an idol of mine, a role model. Ron had, like me, was African-American, had grown up about 42 miles from me in South Carolina. He grew up in a place called Lake City, South Carolina. That's probably not as big as this room. And Ron, from the day he can remember, he wanted to be an astronaut. And he just would not accept no for an answer. He taught himself chemistry and physics because they didn't teach it in his high school in Lake City. He went to North Carolina A&T, became an honor graduate, went to MIT, earned a PhD in laser physics, became one of the world's foremost laser physicists, 5th degree black belt in karate, classical, jazz, you name it, saxophonist, could have been a professional saxophonist if he wanted to. Was selected in NASA's first astronaut class intended to send people to space in the space shuttle, and I had the privilege of meeting him while I was a test pilot, and we talked for a whole weekend, and I was just mesmerized by all that he talked about. When he got ready to leave, he said, hey, are you going to apply for the space program? I said, not on your life. And he looked at me real strange. He said, why not? I said, they'd never picked me. And he looked at me, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, you know, that is the dumbest thing I ever heard. He said, how do you know unless you ask? So last thing I'll tell you, when I say don't be afraid of failure, how do you know if you don't ask? So if there's something you want to do, something about which you're passionate, ask for it. And then if somebody tells you no, say, why not? And then go correct it. And go back again and again and again and again and again. I tell you, I can count on one hand the number of the 400 and some odd people who have traveled to space who happen to be American who made it the first time. We've got one guy who applied 11 times to become a NASA astronaut before he was finally selected. So just keep at it. Keep at it. We had 18,300 applicants for the class of 2017 in the astronaut corps. You know how many we picked? 12. So, you know, realize the competition, but still, you don't do it because it's easy. You do it because you want to be the best in the world. So I would tell you that, you know, just don't be afraid of failure. Who else? Yes. Oh, this is going to be hard.
What do you think our generation will have to offer in regards to space exploration?
Oh, I think, what do I think your generation will have to offer in terms of space exploration? The number one thing you're going to offer us is diversity. You're going to offer us, you're going to make the space program look like this room, only better. You know, when I told you, this is not your father's or your grandfather's or your great-grandfather's space program anymore. It is international partners. It is academic partners. It is entrepreneurial partners, commercial partners. Everybody has a role to play. And at NASA, we really pushed for diversity and inclusion. Now, the diversity is important. That's numbers. But numbers without inclusion don't get you anything. The inclusion part, and this is what you all can do, okay, the students, because you're the leaders. Everybody that sits around the table, you empower them. You let them know. What's your name? Alicia. I guessed. If I'm at the head of the table, or you're at the head of the table, or Linda's at the head of the table, you go around and you ask people for their opinions about whatever the challenge is that you're trying to find out, and you don't let Alicia off the hook. You say, Alicia, you didn't say anything. What do you think? Guess who may come up with the best idea of the day? It may be Alicia. But Alicia's a little, you know, she's a little embarrassed because her idea is so way out there. We're not going to get to Mars in the 2030s if we don't keep looking at some way out there kind of things that are going to help us get there faster, more efficiently, and make it safer for people. It's never going to be safe, safe, safe like people like to be. But that's what I think you all are going to contribute, is the diversity and the demand that everybody be included in the discussion on what we're going to do. Okay? Maybe a couple more questions. Yes? Any over there? Raise your hand if there are, because I'm stuck over here unless somebody pulls me over there. So yell if I miss you. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Terrence, student from Airline High School, and I wanted to ask, in what ways do you believe environmental settings affect aspirations and mental perseverance?
Wow. Okay, now I'm going to, environmental settings, mental perseverance. I think I alluded to the environment, and I hope you're talking about our environment in toto, meaning not just the atmosphere, the oceans, our social environment, and everything. If we don't wake up, and if we don't look at our planet as something that's invaluable to us, we could be too late. You know, in our planning today for space launch places, like we love launching in coastal areas like the Kennedy Space Center in Florida or Wallops over in Virginia. But guess what? When we go to Mars in the 2030s, many of those launch sites are going to be underwater. So we've got to think about that, and we've got to think about it in our planning. So I would say be aware of the environment, be a steward of the environment, and recognize the fact that you and your fellow classmates are a part of that environment. You're a part of the personal part of the environment, and so it means you've got to take care of them also. I have a philosophy, a leadership philosophy that says take care of your people and they'll take care of you. So you all look out for each other. You know, you're thinking about something you want, but make sure that you're not just trying to get Terrence up here and say, okay, later for everybody else. Or Terrence has his, you know, let them work on themselves. Make sure that you reach back all the time, grab somebody and pull them up. So those are some of the things that I would say. Let me get one more question from way in the back. Yes, and you can yell it, I'll repeat it. Ah, question that's asked every single day. Seriously, what do we do if we find life in some form, whether it's plant, animal, microbial, or whatever, what do you then do with it? The first thing you do is keep us away. And I don't mean that as a joke. One of the things that goes into planning for every mission is what we call planetary protection. And, and we're talking about two planets. We're talking about Earth. We want to protect from bringing anything that could be harmful to Earth back here. But equally important, we don't want to take anything from here to there and contaminate it. So when you saw these spacecraft that we're working to develop today, they have an incredible protocol that they go through. They're spotless when they launch. When we sent Curiosity to Mars back in 2012, we almost didn't make our launch window. And launch windows for planetary missions come like every 6 or 8 years or something. So when you miss a launch window for a planetary mission, you don't just come back the next day and say, we'll do it all over. But we had a suspicion that we may have had something that was not clean on the Curiosity, on the rover itself. And so we had to unpack, go back in, not physically scrub it, but really, really, really clean it up again, just to guard against any contamination that we might be taking to Mars. And we'll do the same thing. We'll put particles, microbes, anything we find on another planet through extensive tests before we bring it back to Earth. When we brought the moon rocks back, they went right into a repository at the Johnson Space Center, where they reside even today, and they're under very close protection in terms of environmental cleanliness and everything, and we bring them out bit by bit whenever we want to do research on them. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about all the time. It is not a trivial thing. Let me leave you with a story I like to tell, because hopefully it'll give you something to think about. And it's a story about a young man by the name of Nkosi Johnson. How many of you have heard, I tell this story all the time. So if you've ever heard me speak, you've probably heard me tell this story. So not meaning to bore too many, let me look. How many of you have heard of Nkosi Johnson? How many of you listen to National Public Radio? I know my granddaughters have heard of Nkosi because I tell them about it all the time. Okay, Nkosi Johnson was a young African boy born in a place called KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Little village. His mother had AIDS. She had contracted it from her husband. And so she felt there was a pretty good chance that her child would have AIDS. And she was pretty far along, so she found a friend in a young white woman by the name of Gail Johnson who came to the village periodically. And she said, Gail, if something happens to me after my child is born, would you take him or her in and raise them as your own? And Gail said, I'd be honored to do that. So Nkosi was born. And sure enough, he had AIDS. And sure enough, his mother did not make it through the first year of his life, and she passed away, and so Gail Johnson adopted him. When Nkosi became about 4 years old and began to speak, people realized right away, this is not a normal kid, in that he doesn't cry, he doesn't whine, he doesn't whimper. In his own way, he's saying, we need to do this for the people of the village. We need to do this to try to find a cure for this disease that I have. We need to do this. So Nkosi, from the first time he could speak, was telling people, we need to do this to help other people. And Gail Johnson tells the story of him because she says she could hardly get him to take his medicine. He never complained, he never cried, he never did anything. And through the years, as he got sicker and sicker, but he and Gail traveled around first South Africa, then around the African continent, and then around the world, where he became a UN ambassador against AIDS. An American writer by the name of Jim Wooten heard of him and traveled to South Africa, sat and talked to Nkosi, and he was just mesmerized by this kid, and he said, Nkosi, I don't get it. Why do you do what you do? Nkosi was about 10, 11 years old. And Nkosi said, you know, I may be poor, I may be black, I may have AIDS, but in this world, we're all the same. And so Nkosi had inspired Jim Wooten. He came back to the United States, and he wrote a little bitty book called We Are All the Same. And you can get it on Amazon, you can get it anywhere, and it is a really quick read, but it is the life of Nkosi Johnson. And Jim wrote the book, and, you know, things went as they go. And he got a call one day, and he said, hey, Jim, if you want to see Nkosi, you need to hustle back, because he's probably in his last days. He's not going to make it. He's really, really sick. And Jim Wooten got on the airplane, flew back to South Africa, and he said he walked into the room, and Nkosi was laying there on a bed. He's 12 years old, and he weighed less than 20 pounds. And he's nothing but skin and bones and pus and sores and everything everywhere. And Nkosi had this big smile on his face, and he's barking orders to people. And Jim asked him something, and he said, and Nkosi looked up at him. He said, "Jim, you know, you've asked me a lot of questions, but one thing you never asked me about. You never asked me about death." And Jim Wooten said, he went, "Oh, this is not good." So Nkosi kept barking out orders, and he finally said, "Nkosi, stop." He said, "You know, you're going to die." Nkosi looked at him. He said, "Yep." He said, "You could die today." He said, "Yep." He said, "Well, I don't get it. You told me I never asked you about death, but I don't get it. You know you're going to die. You've never cried out in pain. Gail says you never ask for anything. All you want to do is help other people. What goes on with you?" And he said, and Nkosi looked up at him, and he smiled, and beautiful white teeth and this little black sore up face, and he said, "You do all you can with what you have in the time that you have in the place that you are. Do all you can with what you have in the time that you have in the place that you are. This is what your generation is going to do. You've already started. You've already started to make a difference. Student to student, you know, where you get together with students on other continents and you try to help them in shaping their lives when they come back from an experience or go into something that scares the living crap out of them, probably. You know, you're taking your time to make a difference in what you're doing, and that's what's important. Parents, you're doing the same thing in P2P. So do all you can with what you have in the time that you have in the place that you are. That's the key. Follow Nkosi's advice. So God bless all of you. Thank you so very much for letting me spend time with you tonight. It's been great. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage General Will Fraser, joined by MCEC President and CEO, Dr. Mary Keller.
With great opportunities set before them, not without its challenges, but when I look in their faces and I talk to them, I know we're on a great path, and I know everything's going to be all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Wow.